Great. Just want to welcome you again to our water use efficiency standards meetings. We've been having these semi-regularly. We're trying to help water suppliers that may not be as intimately involved with water use efficiency regulations and keeping them informed about what's going on as they're developed, and then also looking at ways that you can make changes and implement programs to meet the requirements of the water use efficiency standard. So we're glad that you're all here. Really appreciate you taking the time, and we'll go ahead and get into it. And I'll start with a quick update on the water use efficiency standards that were released last week. And then we'll go over the survey results. We'll have a panel discussion about, things that work, things that don't work, and things that really don't work or need change. We have some non-functional turf, and then we'll do Q&A at the end. So here's the Zoom rules. Hopefully everyone knows by now what to do. Next slide. And we'll go ahead and get started on the water use efficiency standard. So next slide. So last year on August 18th, the State Water Resources Control Board released its started its formal rulemaking process and released its draft proposed regulation. They had a workshop on October 4th. It was a marathon workshop lasting late into the night. And on October 17th, they got around 400 comment letters on that proposed regulation. One of the big asks that water suppliers had was a stakeholder process to address some of the concerns that we saw in the proposed regulation. The Water Board actually responded to that, and from November to December, they held 21 meetings with five working groups with stakeholders from water suppliers and NGOs and State Board staff and DWR staff to really kind of get into the nitty-gritty of some of the details of the regulations. And what we're seeing today really reflects a lot of the concerns that we have being addressed and the discussion in those stakeholder meetings. So last week, the regulation was released. Tomorrow, there will be a State Water Resources Control Board workshop. We encourage you to participate in that if you're able to. If you've been reading the news lately, you know that there's a response from some stakeholders that are saying that the regulations have been lightened, and we're not going to save as much water, and so we think there's going to be a big presence from the NGO community. We want to have a presence from the water supply community as well that really kind of acknowledges the changes that have been made in a positive directions and keeps bringing up those concerns that we still have. March 27, written comments are due. Again, encouraging everyone to really personalize if you have an issue with the draft. Put in there why some of the changes work for you in your agency and why you still need some changes that are made. Again, they're really looking for information that's specific to each agency. ACWA will also be doing a NASCAR letter, so if you're interested in adding your logo to that, a draft of that should come out this evening, so be looking for that. And part of the reason there's only a 15-day comment period is they're anticipating possibly having one more comment period, and then the regulations will be adopted over the summer. They have to meet the August 18th, the deadline to get the adoption within a year of the formal rulemaking process starting. So well, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. We've seen a lot of good progress in what was released this week, and looking forward to continuing to work with the State Board and their staff on how we can continue to improve the regulation. Next slide, please. So one of the biggest changes that was made to the standard is the urban water use efficiency objective. The outdoor standards, the efficiency factors that were put out there remain the same, but they did push all the dates back for 5 years. So again, that gives water suppliers additional time plan changes that need to be done, to implement programs, to work with their communities to make long-term changes to meet the requirements of these regulations. Next slide, please. Another big change was in the last proposed regulation, the 20% of the irrigable non-irrigated was only included until 2027. You only had that, they were calling it a buffer. What we argued and what is true is that DWR actually did the analysis, and about 20% of the I and I areas did have irrigation, and that's where the 20% came from. And so in order to really recognize that there's some of these areas are being irrigated, it should be included. And so they included that for everyone that needs it, and they will continue to include it until landscape is updated. One of the concerns that we're going to bring up is that whenever landscape is updated, we need to recognize that DWR's current landscape area measurements, and I'm sure any future ones will still have some challenges with that, and we need to make sure that we have the ability to make adjustments going forward as we get new and hopefully better landscape area measurements. Next slide, please. Other modifications, variances. Initially, you were going to have to apply for a variance on an annual basis. Now it's for every 5 years. We were hoping that we could get variance stacked so that if all your variances together represented 5% or more of your budget, then you could apply for those variances. We did not get that, but what they did say is if it represents 5% or more of that classification. So if the variance is for indoor residential and it is 5% of indoor residential, then you can use that variance. The standards were decoupled from MWULO so that as time goes forward and MWULO may be adjusted, you're not going to have to adjust your standards and change the goal again. Some important areas were keeping recycled waters defined as having a 1.0 efficiency factor, and special landscape areas. I don't know if you recall, there were some temporary provisions for pools and spas. That temporary has gone away, and those are now defined as special landscape areas with a landscape efficiency factor of 1.0. Direct potable reuse was also added into the calculations for the bonus incentive. Next slide, please. Compliance date was being revised. We're about 2 years behind in getting the regulations adopted, so they're pushing back the compliance until 2027 instead of 2020. It's actually originally 2024. In the revised draft, it's 2025. Now they're pushing it back to 2027. For those of you that had to submit a report to DWR at the beginning of this year, that is a legislative requirement. This compliance is for the state board's requirements. So just so you know, that's a little bit of disconnect between what's in the law and what's being proposed in this regulation. Next slide, please. CIA performance measures, they had proposed a phased approach to doing classifications. They moved away from that and just have one date for classifications to be done in 2027. This is kind of to give agencies time to first classify their information and then start to develop their programs and do their conversions as needed. So 2027 is when those classifications will need to be done, and then MUMs will need to be converted or have in lieu projects by, and MUMs are mixed use meters, by June of 2039, and they'll have to be maintained beyond that. Next slide, please. So best CII performance measures, this is another area where we saw a significant amount of improvement. Again, for the disclosable buildings, in the previous draft, you had to identify those disclosable buildings and send out information to the building owners. That's been changed so that you only have to send out information if the building owner requests it. So again, reducing the amount of work that water suppliers have to do if building owners aren't going to use the data that is put together, and again pushing back the requirements for classification and designing programs. Non-functional turf has been aligned with the current regulatory legislative regulations. And then, and again, those disposable buildings have been removed. So next slide, please. Another area where there's been a lot of changes, and I really suggest that anyone that's kind of putting together a comment letter or preparing to comment tomorrow, look at section 975. Some of the information that was originally in some of the CII requirements got kind of slid into that reporting requirement. Again, we're going to request that the state board work with us over the next couple of months after this comment period closes, and come up with what makes sense to be reporting, what are they going to use the information that's reported for, and the other thing is that they in the regulation it requires fiscal year reporting. Again, that can be difficult for some suppliers who have their information on or a calendar year basis, and so that's something that we're going to ask for consideration to have it for calendar year as well as fiscal year. And then the other thing to be really aware of is that they're pulling a lot of the data that they're going to use to calculate compliance from the electronic annual report. And so if you're not the person that's doing the electronic annual report, or you're not sure who's doing the electronic annual report or what it says in your electronic annual report, I really encourage you to look up that information, make sure it's correct, make sure it's corrected in the database, and make sure it's corrected moving forward again, so that you're not found out of compliance because perhaps there's different ways of calculating population or accounting for growth. So that is what I have. Next slide. I think that's it. Again, our workshop is today. We're going to focus on both implementation and just this overview. The state board will have a workshop tomorrow. Comments to March 27th. If you want to sign under the comment letter for Aqua, look for that tonight. And then adoption in summer of 2024. So with that, we'll open it up for questions.
We have one in the chat already. Someone asked, are you going to get a copy of the slides? So I think we can address that one pretty quickly. Yes, you'll get a copy of the slides and the recording. Does anybody else want to unmute themselves and ask a question? We have about 5 minutes for questions. And Debbie, if there's anything in the chat, feel free to read it out if you'd like.
And we will have time at the end. We should have time. Hopefully we'll have time at the end for questions if we need to. Again, if you think of something later, go ahead and we can bring it up at the end of this meeting. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and turn it over to Michelle. Yep. And go over survey results.
Great. Well, thank you, Elizabeth, and good morning. So we did send out a quick survey, and what we were hoping to get from the survey was to find out how things are feeling for everyone. And so we really appreciate your feedback. So I'm going to walk through the results we have so far. We had 20 people actually take the survey so far, but as we're nearing almost 100 on this call, we would like to give you a chance to take the survey while I'm talking. So you feel free to click the link. It should be in the chat. Nikki Powell from our team just posted it, so you can open it up. It only has a few questions. I will do a walkthrough through the answers, but we are still collecting the results, and I will share back out anything that we collect from those attendees today when we send the notes and the recording from this call. With that, next slide, and I will go through the results we have so far. But again, if you haven't taken the survey yet, please do so. Everything I'm saying you can listen to while you fill in the questions. So 4 questions. The first one was, what is your biggest regulation specific concern? Select all that apply, because we had multiple things. So the top 5, amazingly enough, have a very similar theme. It's concerned on CII. So we have kind of some best management practice comments, CI accounts converting to DIMS, and then the CI classification requirements. So definitely a CI flavor on biggest concern. And that's very similar. We did take this survey last October as well, or similar version, and that was a similar feeling at that time. So it hasn't changed in the last 6 months. Next slide, please. But go ahead, please fill it in. Again, those of you taking the survey, and let us know, and we'll see if it changes at all. Question 2, what additional concerns do you have? Not surprising, the timeline for implementation is the biggest concern, even with the relaxed timelines that Elizabeth just highlighted. There still is a lot in there. There's a lot to do. So 70% of the people agreed that timeline was the number one concern. The second highest was lack of staffing. I have heard a lot of discussion about staffing, and spoiler alert, but the case studies we have coming are going to allude to, and we have a table put together. So thank you for those of you that took staffing and commented that that was a concern. So we made a table to show you the staffing of the few case study presenters we have today, but in the future, maybe we'll start talking about that. We intend to have additional workshops, and we may dive into that topic deeper. And then third place was lack of knowledge and training. And there may be, some additional ideas of ways to, kind of help get everyone more comfortable. Sounds like specifically in CII, that seems to be the area of concern. And then last but not least, of course, lack of funding. So top 4 concerns are right there. And very few of you have no concerns. So there you go. Next slide, please. Question 3 is, do you have a CI classification system in place? Over 95% of you said that you didn't have one, or it wasn't aligned with state board energy requirements of 22 categories. Not surprising, because that was a new idea to align them with Energy Star and hasn't traditionally been done in our field. So it looks like we have some work to do there, definitely, and hence that aligns with some of the concerns. But hopefully, give us a couple years, I guess, then that will hopefully change, instead of 95% of the people not having what we need, to have that change to be the opposite. All right, next slide, please. And question 4 is, do you feel prepared to calculate and comply with the urban water use objective in the time of the first report due January 1st, 2027? Again, note the date change. Thank you that just joined, and I know a few of you might have missed Elizabeth's comment, but the new date is January 1st. Over 2/3 of you say no, that you don't feel comfortable and you need training or support, or you haven't reviewed the requirements. Not surprising, because they just came out last week. But there's definitely a lot of room to grow in compliance. And 1/3 of you think that they have it together. So congratulations to those of you that do, and hopefully you can help the other 2/3 that aren't feeling as comfortable yet. And that's one of the topics we're going to do today, is actually start in that direction. We have, thankfully, 4 volunteers that were willing to be case studies, and they're going to start talking about their journey and where they're at right now, knowing that clearly it's evolving over time, but they're willing to share where they're at and where they think they're going to help kind of everyone as a group. Next slide, please. So again, before we dive in the panel, Nikki posted it in the chat, so go ahead and check the chat. If you have not answered those 4 questions, please do so. It takes just a few minutes, and we will compile the results from the entire group. Even if you don't have a water utility, say you're a consultant or you're a wholesaler, please still take it, because I feel like we're all on the same journey together, and either you're going to be supporting or helping, or could be training, and we would love to hear from you as well. So it's doesn't just have to be water utilities. All right, so next thing we're going to do is the panel discussion. We've nicknamed it the good, the bad, and the ugly, because we really did want to focus on not only what's going well, which is typically what people like to present, but also the challenges and things that maybe didn't go as well, so that they can kind of try and allude to some of those pitfalls, and so people can avoid them in the future. Next slide, please. So here are our panelists. We have 4 of them today. We made a mini table for you, just so you can kind of get a scale on their size. You may be, a different size, but that kind of gives you a little bit of context with what they're sharing. We have Eastern, Helix, Molten Nagel, and SFPUC, or San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. We have the number of connections that they have. We've also included, again, the number of staff. Thank you again for alluding that staff was kind of scary / challenging. And it's exciting to hear that some new opportunities have been opened. I had some conversations with people who their entire position was created because of this regulation. So I don't think that that's going to be a one-off. And I think in the future, there will definitely be more staff added, but this is where we're at for now. And they may have more or more left than you, but that's kind of where people are at these case studies. And then what is a staffing plan moving forward? Are you going to do it internally? Are you going to use consultants? How do you intend to utilize them? And so we kind of have information there. I'm not going to read the whole table. I'm assuming you can read faster than I can talk, and these will also be provided to you as a resource after the meeting. So with that, we are going to go in this order, and we are going to have our first case study presenter from Eastern. Next slide, please. And so Jenna is going to present her experience at Eastern, and we are going to hold questions, but please put them in the chat, and then we'll see how many questions there are. And either she will address your questions directly in the chat after she's done speaking, or at the end of all the case studies, we may share out verbally depending on our timing. But we want to have plenty of time for all the speakers to share their individual stories on their journey. With that, Jenna, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, Jenna Shimon, Director of Water Use Efficiency here at Eastern Municipal. Been here for a year and 4 months roughly now, but I've been in the water industry for a little over 20 years now. Next slide, please. Amazing. So just a little bit about the district. We were established in 1950. So next year we'll be celebrating our 75th anniversary. Be on the lookout for lots of marketing and information about any events we might be having in relation to that. We are a wholesale agency as well as a retail agency serving in my main office is in Paris, California. But we, have Temecula, Murrieta, Paris, San Jacinto, Hemet, a bunch of agencies around us. Well, we currently serve about 1 million people, but we're only 43% built out. So lots of growth happening within our service area. Next slide, please. So not only do we wholesale and retail potable water, and as I mentioned, we have 166,000 connections now, constantly adding more. We add about 300 to 400 meters every month. Most of those are residential, but we are seeing an uptick in commercial in various regions of our service area. We also treat wastewater at 4 treatment plants, as well as providing recycled water to approximately 850 accounts, and that is also constantly growing. We're constantly putting more purple pipes in the ground and getting more connections brought on. And we do have certain portions of our service area where if you're putting in new development with your landscaping, you are required to use recycled water to irrigate that landscaping. Next slide, please. As mentioned, we're not that built out, so we're constantly growing. Since the year 2000, our population has grown exponentially, while our water use, though, has gone down. A lot of this we like to attribute to new building standards, but also to our longstanding customers. They've done their part to reduce water use and to keep that water use down. We've also done a lot of investment to diversify our supply portfolio. So we have several desalination plants here within our service area. We really put a lot of emphasis on recycled water. The whole concept there is to increase our local resilience and reduce our reliance on imported supplies as much as possible. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, our overall water use is down. You can see here how it's trended down, peaked during some of the drier times, but is stabilizing out down. And I just saw a presentation from Water Resources last week that we may be seeing our lowest GPCD that we've ever seen. But until we do a little bit more analysis to make sure that's accurate, we're not going to release any numbers. But it is great to see, again, I attribute that to building standards are just better than they used to be as far as the appliances and everything. But really, our customers have done the work and continue to do their part. Next slide, please. So I'll go in a little depth about our short-term efforts, what our medium-term efforts, and long-term what we're looking at. And hopefully more good than bad and ugly, but I'm sure there's a little bit of mix of everything. Next slide, please. So short term, because as it looks right now, we'll be in compliance with our urban water use objective. We were putting a lot of emphasis into assisting our retail agencies. There are 5 that need to comply with urban water use objective. 2 are larger and very engaged. And then there's 3 that only have like a third of a staff member that's even tuned in at all to this. So trying to engage all of them, especially those with less staff to take this on. Just engage them on what the regulations say, any deadlines and comment periods they need to be cognizant of, but also trying to provide some reporting support. So I walk them through kind of how that Excel spreadsheet we all had to turn in the beginning of the year, what I was doing with that, what data we were gathering, just to provide as much support as possible. But then on the other side for us, really looking into, for the reporting, what data points are we going to need to be compiling? And do we have that already as a process, or is it something we need to come up with? Finding that there's a lot of different places to find this data. So a big goal is to try and bring that into much less software or much less places that we're looking. Ideally, we'll be bringing a new staff member on in the next couple of months that can help us with this. We also know that our landscape area measurement data for older accounts is out of date and not necessarily accurate. And so we're starting to look into how can we tackle all of those legacy accounts and get them updated. And while we do have some existing CII classifications, we need to make sure that A, they're all classified, and B, figure out how to get them to the Energy Star portfolio categories, and then create a process for updating those going forward. Recycled water, as I mentioned, we have that required reuse area. And so, it's a big focus for us. We've got a lot of new development coming in that we're trying to just make sure we've got the facilities available for them to connect to recycled, or will soon. And so, certain service areas are going to see a big boom in the recycled water use because they're going in nicely in order, and others are a little out of sync. So, hopefully we'll get them all on purple pipe here soon. We also, at the last year, put in a temporary ban on the irrigation of non-functional turf in response to the drought declaration. But then earlier this year, we made that a permanent ban on the irrigation of non-functional turf on non-residential properties. So from that, what we've done is we're starting to look at what customers were consistently over budget from March to August, and then trying to identify what their landscapes are actually made of. Well, we did have a variance process. We held lots of workshops, and we sent out lots of informational letters and flyers and postcards. We only got about 110 customers that reported they have functional turf on their property, but we have 2,000 some connections that could have functional turf. So we're trying to do an analysis. Who was over budget? What does it look like on their property? Some, we found that we couldn't even identify where 3 of the meters were for some reason, even though we have everything geolocated. Others, it was just a matter of, well, there's lots of different things. They have functional, non-functional, and other plants. So what do we do about that? And the way we did that within our administrative code is we have budget-based tiered rates. And so we reduced their ET factor from 0.7 down to 0.5. And so what do we do now once we finish this analysis of all these customers? That'll be one of our next big steps. Next slide, please. So just to give you an idea of what our recycled water usage portfolio looks like, mainly goes to our agricultural customers. If you ever driven along Ramona Expressway, that's where they are located. We also do have some within, a couple golf courses, some environmental for our wetlands where bird migration occurs. We also have some landscape customers that are on that. That's a big focus for us now, is converting some of these landscapes. Next slide, please. So medium term, as we look out, a little bit more towards when we may not meet our urban water use objective, or just once we get this initial data kind of updated and we figure out, what we need to do and collect. So we'll continue to provide resources to our retail agencies, as well as much technical support as we can around them gathering data for reporting, but also as they look to develop some programs. We've been doing this for decades now, and so we have a lot of knowledge on what to do and what didn't work. And so we really want to make sure we're supporting them as much as possible. And one effort too is to kind of create a more regional effort where we have work group meetings so we can share this information and maybe work on some regional partnerships. There's a lot of good regional partnerships that exist throughout the state. And so why reinvent the wheel when you can take what's working really well and try to fit it to your service area or your region. Again, going to data, once we've updated the landscape area measurements, they're acquired, we'll have to update the accounts, looking at both the indoor and the outdoor component, because that outdoor standard, I mean, the indoor standard, has its own legislation driving when that's supposed to come ratchet down. I will say that looking at our GPCD and doing some kind of more piloted analysis, we think our customers are well within the next couple of trigger points to meet that indoor standard. But really the ones who aren't, we got to make sure we're going to help them as much as possible. The next thing we'll make sure that we're doing is getting together all of our landscape area measurements so we can submit that as alternative data to the state, because we know that what we have and what they provided to us a couple years ago is not the same. And with all of our growth, we'll want to make sure that gets included also. We'll also want to be looking at identifying what plants there are out there so we can try to identify more non-functional turf. Also just to maybe look at tying that to some new programming or even just outreach and messaging. And even it's just something as simple as telling people, hey, this is like a great time of year to stop irrigating those plants because they don't need it if we know there's a lot of ground covers and things. And we also want to make sure that they're tied to the right meters. If we need to update our CI classification, we'll begin doing that. As mentioned, that's something we might look to have a intern kind of help us with. But obviously we'll, make sure we have the process set up to support them properly. Recycled water will continue to identify possible sites for conversion and begin working with those customers. And as far as the administrative code change, once we've kind of analyzed what's out there, the properties, we'll do targeted outreach to those customers who still have non-functional turf that they're irrigating. But also we want to develop a process to help the local agencies that need to submit compliance reports for AB 1572, work with them to make sure that maybe we just provide them something that they submit to the state, maybe we submit on their behalf, but just trying to help them around that. So make sure everyone's complying. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we have allocation-based rate structure or budget-based tiered rates. Not going to go too in depth with it, but this is basically what it looks like for us. I find it very unique working here because a portion of your tier 1 is your indoor and outdoor, and a portion of your tier 2 is the rest of your outdoor type of thing. But also how that rate looks like is based on our supply portfolio. So it gets a little confusing to explain that to customers. So I got to give kudos to our outreach department who does a phenomenal job with, whenever we do it, Prop 218, it's not an easy process for them. Next slide, please. So long-term, again, we'll continue to assist our retail agencies, but really we're looking to develop some kind of a regional program. Maybe we can get some grant funding, get some, maybe get Riverside County on board to help out with something, just so we can help fund these water use efficiencies across multiple suppliers. We have some very small water agencies that, over 3,000 connections that have to comply, but have like 10 staff members. So how do we help support them as best possible while also supporting our customers? As far as data, we really are looking long-term to increase the utilization of our AMI data. So we're like 99.5% AMI. There's like 6 meters that aren't AMI, probably never will be. But how can we better use that to help our customers, to track water use, to maybe develop some new programs? Really just trying to figure out like what are we seeing from that and how does that drive our internal processes? Recycled water. So currently the way our recycled water landscape plan check process works is it's much more in depth than the potable water side of things. We actually ask the customers lay out where all the valves and everything is going to be, and then we have an inspection crew that goes out and GPSs where that is and geolocates it. We may not go that far with our potable water process, but looking to maybe align those a little bit better to where we are better understanding what is actually being installed after the fact. And then maybe tracking some of that water use just to see, to report back to the state, these 0.8, 0.63, 0.55, is that something we're actually seeing? Because that can really help maybe drive the next round of regulations, or if there's any updates, we can really go out there and say, like, here's some really good data. Even on the recycled water side, still water use, but, maybe lining that just a little bit better. And then with our administrative code change, we'll continue to offer programs to the properties. I will say, we increased our funding, adding on to Metropolitan's rebate. We did increase our dollar amount for the turf conversion. That is a short-term endeavor. That is something to try and do the carrot before the stick. So trying to get all these customers that do have non-functional turf to convert to something else. And then eventually we may remove that funding because they should have done, the right thing at the right time. And then it would be more of the stick where they're in those higher tiers, and there may be other administrative things that we can do, but long term we'll probably remove that carrot a bit. We'll still have support, but remove the financial carrot. Next slide, please. And then how are we doing all of this? So this is the Water Use Efficiency Department staffing. We have technically 3 work groups. You have the administrative side of the house. So there's myself, the director, I have an assistant, and then keep a lookout for, we'll be posting a management analyst position here in the next couple months. They'll support both the conservation, the potable water side of things, as well as the recycled water program side of things. But I'm the primary for our compliance and reporting for the urban water use objective. I do get a little assistance from other departments that are the ones that already like do our EAR data and all that. But for the most part, it's just me. And then that management analyst will be key in helping with that. On the conservation side, we have 7 direct staff right there, recycled water programs. We have a manager, and then hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll be posting this recycled water program analyst. And that's kind of a succession planning thing. Our manager is a couple years from retirement, so we want to share his wealth of knowledge. But also, though, as we expand all these new sites, we're just going to need more assistance. We do have a lot of consultants on the recycled water side of the house. That's partly because we're doing some master plan updates right now. On the conservation side, though, we do have a couple of consultants that we utilize. And as we look in updating all the landscape area measurements, we'll need a consultant to help us with that just because there's so many. I will say, like, our Landscape for Living program is a very unique program. Been around for 2.5, 3 years now. And right now we primarily service for residential customers, but working with We're looking to expand that sometime in the summer or fall out to our commercial customers. It really is much more of a hands-on, try to help them, walk them through the process, make it easier for them to, fill out the paperwork and get everything done as much as we can. And then interns. So here at Eastern, we have 2 great intern type opportunities. You have your typical intern that's, college intern that applies as a regular intern. We also have the youth ecology program where we partner with a local community college to bring in students that are interested in working in water and the different parts of the water department. And they can be with us for up to a year. It's 6-month cohorts. And so we have one that we just got that's going to be assisting on the recycled water side of things. But she actually came from another department, so she already is very familiar with what we do and how we do it. And so I think that's really unique that they're paid, and so it's a little bit different. They're much more vested in joining. They're not just like, hey, what do you guys have going on? And so that's kind of nice. Some are more technical in their degree, some are not, but it's been very successful, and everyone seems to have a great time when they do it. And budget. So as far as our budget, as I mentioned, we're a metropolitan member agency, so a lot of our programming runs through them. We do add additional funding, but as far as what we budget for projects and programs, it's about $3 million. We do budget another $150,000 for some one-off consultant work, various trainings, supplies, conferences, travel, those kind of things. But the bulk of it there is, that $3 million is what we do to support our customers. So that's it. And there's my contact information. Very happy to answer any questions you may have after this. I will say about calling me, I broke my foot, so most days I'm working from home. So email is usually the fastest.
Great. Thank you so much, Jenna, and hope your foot recovers. So if there are any questions for Jenna, go ahead and put them in the chat. We are going to hold all questions to the end. Jenna, if you want to answer the questions that come in via chat, that would be great. And then at the very end, we'll have a kind of a combined discussion and we can elevate any of those questions that you saw. So with that, thank you for your time and for that great presentation. So our next case study is Julie Ortiz from San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, and she's going to dive on to her experience, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much for coming today, Julie.
Yeah, good morning. I'm glad to be here. Jenna, that was a super interesting presentation, very detailed. Mine's going to be a little bit more of a general flyover, so happy to, if folks have more detailed questions for me, definitely happy to answer those in the chat. The San Francisco Public Utilities Commission is a retail wholesale water agency. We deliver drinking water to 2.7 million people in 4 counties in the San Francisco Bay Area. We also collect and treat wastewater for San Francisco, and we generate clean power for municipal buildings, residents, and businesses in San Francisco. I manage the conservation program for our retail service area, which is primarily the city of San Francisco, although we have a number of large retail customers as well as single family level retail customers outside the city. Next slide, please. So just lost in a Zoom panel here. There we go. So I love the good, the bad, and the ugly theme, and I am following up my presentation. So the good and the basics. Good news is we are slated to meet our objective. We have a very low residential GPCD. Our average is around 42 gallons per person a day. And we have relatively low outdoor use compared to many other areas of the state. That's not to say we don't have any, and it's not to say that we don't have residential customers who are way over the average, and we don't have some outdoor areas that are also over efficient standards. We are not planning in the near term to seek any variances. So that's, one process we know won't be taking up a lot of effort. We are planning to use a mix of data from the state and our own data, and I'll go into that a little bit with the additional slides. We also, all of our CII accounts are SIC coded. That's the standard industry classification system. And we know and we analyze the top use for the top using sectors. We have a strong and established conservation program, and we have a conservation master plan that we update every year. In fact, we're in the process of updating that for 2025. We do it in sync with our urban water management plan. I'm not going to go into detail about all the different program offerings in our program, but we feel like we're in a good position with what we have and what we're planning to roll out. And then for us, really, regardless of the fact that we're projected to be well within our objective, we are definitely continuing to seek more opportunities for water savings and to continue to improve our programs and expand our programs. So that's really what drives us. Next slide, please. So getting into the bad and perhaps the ugly. For us to comply, though, it is still taking staff and consultant time to get prepared. I know, like for all of you, just trying to understand the requirements and the changes in the requirements and what we need to do feels like it's been a bit of a, constant, effort to run around, under the trapeze wire and figure out where things will fall. But we have been trying to monitor that. We also spent a considerable effort reviewing the DWR residential LAM data. I have to say, in the end, I'm not sure maybe it warranted us spending that much time, but we did send back some requests for corrections. And again, because our outdoor use is relatively low, I guess that's why I noted that, we didn't necessarily have to spend that effort, but we wanted to make sure that the data was as correct as we thought we could make it. We also spent a lot of time measuring and analyzing parcels that serve our CII dedicated irrigation meter customers. We have not done that before. While we do some courtesy landscape water budgets for some of our larger sites and sites that have participated in our landscape grant programs, we don't have that program in place for all of our dedicated irrigation meter customers. And it is something we've been wanting to do, and these requirements will help propel us into getting that done in the near term. We are still in the process of identifying our mixed use meters and sites that potentially have non-functional turf. That is taking some time, and I'll touch on a couple of the approaches we're using for that. And even though we have our accounts are classified in our billing system, we still need to update our analysis of those. I noted here we need to address missing SICs. They're not actually missing, they're just classified as other. So working through those that are classified as others to see whether we could more specifically classify them will be some work. And for us, because we're also a wastewater agency, our wastewater staff use the SIC codes to help determine the pollutant load factors for the businesses served. And so we have to work in conjunction with them. It can't solely be water use efficiency exercise. And then we have to work very closely with our customer service billing team if we're looking at making any updates to the classifications. And then once that is done, and we were also waiting for the final list of the state's classification codes, we'll set up the crosswalk between our billing system and the state codes so that we can have an automated report generated out of our billing system. So it is also, taking us some work to compare and align our existing CII program measures with the state BMPs. And again, we've been sort of waiting to see where things land with the state BMPs. And then we will have work to determine who we need to contact, how we want to do that, when, and just really set up a system and a schedule for those efforts. So overall, we anticipate that most of our effort is going to be on the reporting and complying with the CII performance measures. And we're definitely going to need continued staff and consultant support. I think in that table that Michelle first showed, it indicated the number of staff we have. We are actually in the process now of hiring another conservation program manager, and they will be helping with some of this. That position is posted, so if anybody is interested, I encourage you to go to our website, sfwater.org, and you can find it there. Next slide, please. So our approach on the CII front, which, as I noted, is really the main area of work for us, we have now mapped our parcels that serve about the 1,700 CII dedicated irrigation meter accounts we have. And we are fortunate that we have good GIS data in-house. We did create an ArcGIS dashboard tool through its online ArcGIS subscription that our agency has. And that tool has enabled us to be able to more easily review information on our CII dedicated irrigation meters and help identify those with mixed use meters and potentially non-functional turf areas. And this tool also, as I mentioned, it is propelling us to move forward to try to expand our informational landscape water budget program to all of our dedicated irrigation meter accounts, and having a tool like this will help. So we are in the process of analyzing our CII account water use by code, and then looking at, I don't know, I kept saying missing 6, it's again, those classified as other, but looking at addressing those. We are also in process of updating our CII equipment rebate program to make that more, we're basically upping the dollar amount and the percentage of equipment costs that we cover. So we hope to encourage more participation through those changes. And then once the regulations are final, we will create the automated billing system crosswalk and launch our schedule and process for the regular and expanded. I mean, we already reach out to our top users, but we'll be aligning that with the state schedule and plan. Next slide, please. So I did want to end on sharing something that I think is kind of cool, maybe pretty. I guess that's in the eye of the beholder. But this is just a snapshot from one of the GIS tools dashboards that we created. And again, we did that using ArcGIS online. And it was, we did have a consultant help us. And it's relatively easy to do. I would say it's possible that other agencies could, if you have somebody in-house with some GIS knowledge. But this particular one is showing what we're using to help identify mixed use meters. We had it set for the 500,000 gallons a year of use per parcel. So we'll be adjusting that to reflect the half-acre change, but it enables us to look on the map, locate those, pull up account information, and then we'll make the efforts to reach out to these customers a bit easier. We have a similar dashboard for areas with potential non-functional turf. We've also been trying to map our special landscape areas along with overall the CII dedicated irrigation meter accounts. I think that might be my next slide. Yes, so for more information, feel free to contact me. Also, you can check out what our basic conservation program offerings are at the web link on this slide. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Michelle.
Great. Thank you so much, Julian. Nice presentation. I appreciated all the visuals too. I think that's great. And yes, a lot of people are doing GIS, and we'll have even more to come. Spoiler alert for all of our case studies. Again, if any questions are for Julie, please put them in the chat. She's happy to look at them and try and address them. And or if she needs a longer answer, you know, we can also follow up with emails as needed. So with that, thank you. And then our next speaker will be Vince from Helix, and he will be describing his approach for his district. So thank you for coming, and welcome to Vince.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Julie, I'm gonna have to touch base with you. That conservation GIS dashboard was very impressive. So you'll hear from me after this presentation or later on. Welcome, everybody. My name is Vince Stambros. I'm a senior public affairs representative over at Helix Water District. Go ahead and do next slide, please. Helix Water District is a retail agency in San Diego's East County. If you look at that map, you see a lot of gray areas. You see the mountains in the brown. We are suburban, inland East County. We provide water service to 56,000 accounts, about over 750,000 customers. 81% of our water use is residential, just given the area. It's the suburbs. Because it's also inland, about 44% of our service area is classified as disadvantaged communities. That has implications for overall water use. I'll touch on that a little bit. But you also pair that with San Diego having some of the most reliable and expensive water. It really changes how people use water. So go ahead, next slide. We have a very, and I think you can probably click a couple, 3 times. Perfect, that's what we needed. We have a broad conservation program, both what the Helix Water District does itself. That photo in the top corner is a demonstration landscape we did on our own just to inspire customers on drought tolerant landscaping. We have a broad suite of other programs as well, but it has results. We have a very low GPCD. 88 gallons per person per day. We've reduced our water use by 1/3 since 2003. It's really impressive. And we have 4.25 full-time positions dedicated to public affairs, legislative advocacy, conservation, and our educational programs. So very, very light on staffing, but we do offer a broad amount of services. The photos on the bottom, just to give you an idea of what our customers look like. If they do have grass and they haven't converted it, it probably looks like the bottom corner, the photo on the bottom. The ones that are bigger properties, they've already converted, they've got rid of grass, they have low water use landscaping. So you can see the conservation program is working. Go ahead and next slide. So with that said, we're slated to meet our objective without any issues. And there's a typo on this. It should say 2035 and 2040. I did this before they changed the regs on last week. But you can see our residential portion is going to be under, even onto the 2040 regs. The CII dedicated irrigation meters, we actually know the amount of water that goes to dedicated irrigation meters, the water budgets. The regulations and the most stringent are going to be 0.45. We're already at a 0.27. Our CII customers are not really using water outdoors. They're efficient there. And we've got plenty of wiggle room there on water loss. So what that leaves is a lot of emphasis on the CII portion. Next slide. Thank you. Next one. One more. Cool. So we have sort of a philosophy or a perspective, if you will, on how we're going to approach these regulations going forward. First one is, it's not always best to be first. The early bird, does it really get the worm? When they're changing the regulations all the time, we want to make sure that what we do and put our time into is going to be worthwhile and actually what the regs are at the end of the day. Second, we want to reduce friction. That's on two sides. One is administratively, so the amount of work that it's going to require us to implement a program. Again, we're pretty light on staffing, so we don't want to have to put a lot of work into something to have to do it each year. And the other side of the reducing friction is on the customers. We don't really want to burden our customers more so than we have to, because they've already done so much. Lastly, we're going to look at the existing regional programs to best help implement some of this. Go ahead, next slide. So the first portion is our dedicated irrigation meters for our CII accounts. We did this back in 2008. We measured our landscape areas for our dedicated irrigation meters. They're assigned on a water budget. When we did this, we had to do aerial mapping. We gave them a water budget. Our customers were, a lot of them were not really happy with the water budget. So we actually ground truthed about 80% of them. So we've got them measured, we've actually got them ground truthed, and we make annual updates as there's changes with UWUO or new sites going in. Again, we've done the calculations. Our dedicated irrigation use has plenty of wiggle room. We'll be able to hit that 0.45, no problem. So go ahead, next slide. So this brings us over to the mixed use meters. And you saw with Julie, she did the calculations for the sites over 500,000 gallons. We did that too. Go ahead and advance it. It was this fun calculations. Doesn't matter because they changed it from 500,000 gallons to half an acre. And so again, you don't necessarily want to be first on a lot of these things because you want to make sure that the regulations finalize before we start doing these preliminary calculations and figuring out everything. That's just been our experience so far. Next slide. So the way the current regulations are for accounts that are mixed use meters over half an acre. This photo here is an example of one of those. So we have to, the way that the regulation is written is you have to calculate the total. How many accounts have over half an acre of landscaping on a mixed use meter by 2027? There's also another component that, go ahead and do next slide. Okay, this is what I wanted. So you have to figure out how many are over half an acre by 2027. And then those are the ones that essentially you're casting a net, and whatever you catch in that net is the ones that have to implement the UWUO technologies. Or you can cast a more targeted net and you can figure out who is over half an acre and has outdoor water use that's estimated to be over budget on the mixed use meters, and pull those people in by 2029. So on one side, administratively doesn't take a lot of work to be able to do it by 2027, but now you've got this bigger pool of people that you'd have to implement the required UWUO technologies. For us, we saw an off-ramp in the regulations that says AMI would be able to be used as one of the UWUO technologies because you can quantify outdoor water use. While our district doesn't have AMI, we have about 600 AMI accounts. These are for meters that are in people's backyards. They used to be drive-by AMR, but we've just upgraded them to AMI. So we're looking at saying, okay, let's do this analysis. We will figure out how many are over half an acre by 2027. If we take that 3,000 CII customer account base and we shrink it down to a nice 200 customer account base number, we'll probably just switch them. If that 3,000 gets to say 700, it's a little bit harder to kind of bring all those people on to AMI when we don't actually have AMI rolled out for all of our customers. So in that case, we would wait out till the 2029. Next, we just advance it once. So yeah, that was kind of what we're looking at. You can change the size of the net that you want to cast, and you want to figure out how many people you're going to be bringing in to implement the required UWUO technologies. Regardless of which adventure you choose, you have to implement BMPs. And for that, we're looking to all the existing programs. Next slide. As for the classification, there's a couple different things I've got lumped in here. One is the disclosable buildings. If you haven't done it, you can do it. It's pretty easy. It was listed on the regulation where you actually go for it. We pulled it. There was 91 something accounts. 31 were disclosable commercial buildings. 10 of them were storage units, so not very helpful or impactful for water use. But as far as having to do this report of their water use each year, we're just going to have our informations team actually automate this process, because we, again, don't want to have the administrative burden to have to do this. So anything that can be automated, we'll put the time in to make sure that it is. Moving over to the other requirement, which was to identify the CII users. This is a painful choose your adventure sort of layout they have in the regulations. This is an example that if you are first, it's actually a little bit easier. So the first adventure is if you classify all of those 22 categories, and you identify the top 2.5 and the top 20% of those of your CII customers, that is what you have to report on. If you wait to classify everybody by 2027, you have to identify your top 2.5 CII customers, and then you have to identify your top 20% in each of those 22 classifications. So that would be 22 top 20 lists and one top 2.5 list. So if you wait till 2027, that's what you have going forward. If you wait longer till 2029, you have to send a top 20% of all of the of each of the classifications according to the key business indicators that you have suggested. If that doesn't sound painful, I don't know, you might be a sadist, but that it just sounds miserable. So we're aiming for that 2025 option. I know it's going to be a sprint, but it just really reduces the administrative overhead. And then also maintaining a 95% classification yearly. There's other regulations on the cross connection side that are requiring commercial customers to have a specific type of report every time they change account hands. So we're looking at that and our customer service teams to help us maintain the 95% classifications annually. Next one. Finally is the BMPs. So this one sounds pretty rough, but it's not as bad as it seems. So we have to start reporting our BMPs beginning January 1, 2025. We have to finally have them up, running, and implemented by 2039, which is a lot of breathing room. With that said, we do have to create new programs. There are new ways we have to talk to our CII customers. But as much as possible, we're going to be looking to the existing regional programs that Metropolitan offers, that our wholesaler, the Water Authority, offers, and any of the informational material that we already have on our website, or any of the ways that we're already engaging with our customers broadly. We're going to be using those to check the boxes for those PMPs. You have to be able to report the estimated water savings based off of the BMPs that you implement. And then again, they have to be implemented by 2039. And next slide. And I know it sounds harsh because I did say check the boxes. That's not something I ever really want to say. I got into this work because we want to save water. We want to put water to use where people can use it, where it goes to use for upstream and downstream users, and just makes a better future. However, the way that these regulations are going, as you can see with our agency, a lot of my time and effort is going to be spent on programs that aren't necessarily going to save a lot of meaningful water use. My CII customers account for 13% of water use. If I create a great program and get them to save 20% of their water use, I will have saved my district's overall water use by 2.5%. It's not really meaningful considering the amount of time and effort I could put into other programs such as residential or multifamily that can really draw the needle down in a different direction. So some things to keep in mind. is it's really increasing our administrative costs having to implement all these CII portions. And it's also just not very fruitful because reporting, I want to be clear, reporting doesn't actually mean water savings. Just because you report something doesn't mean you're going to start saving water. It just means that you reported it. Reporting also doesn't mean that because you reported it, you're going to be saved or there's going to be intervention or some sort of opportunity, especially when it comes to the State Water Resources Board. We had received feedback on our 2015 Urban Water Management Plan in 2021. So we had already exited one drought, gone through a wet year, and entered another drought by the time we received feedback. When we all start reporting our BMPs and these much more precise programs, I highly doubt there's going to be the same implementation or intervention. And then finally, there's a lot, as I had laid out in the CII classifications and the mixed use meters, there's opportunities for a choose your own adventure, if you will. Whatever it is, as you approach it, we're looking at it as you've got to put your customers first. It's not fair to my customers that we spend more time administratively doing something that might not be fruitful. So anything that we can do that reduces the amount of time that we have to spend reporting, implementing on programs that have questionable savings, we're going to be doing that to make sure that we save our customers and put their resources to the best use. So I wish I could end on a more positive note, but at least we're definitely under budget and going to make it's not going to be an issue for us to reach our overall water budget.
Great. Thank you so much, Vince. I appreciate the honesty and the thoughts. I don't think you're alone in some of those comments about reporting doesn't save water. And so there's, different creative ways people are trying to think about how can I use these regulations to continue to save water, but still comply. So I think there's a lot of discussion that can be had in that arena. Appreciate your time and sharing your thoughts with us. Again, questions for Vince, please put them in the chat and appreciate your insights. So moving on, our next case study presenter will be our final one and our fourth case study, and that is Justin Finch, and he is coming from Molten-Nagel Water District. Looking forward to have him share his approach and his GIS thoughts, which I heard some positive comments on Julie's GIS dashboard. So excited for Justin to continue that dialogue in this topic area. So thanks for coming, and Justin, it's all yours.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for the intro, Michelle. So I'm Justin Finch, Water Efficiency Manager at Molten-Nagel Water District. We're in South Orange County, just right north of San Diego County Water Authority. Next slide. So just real quick, we'll go over some stats on the district and some of the approaches we're doing on creating meter service areas and some things that might help you all in whatever you're planning to do, especially if you're doing anything that we're thinking about or that we're working on, how to really sell it beyond just the benefits of water efficiency to your agency. Next slide. The mandatory slide about Molten-Nagel, here's a picture of our staff and our board. We've got a publicly elected 7-member board. We serve drinking water, recycled water, and also provide wastewater collection and treatment in our service area. About 180 staff on board here. And we have a water budget-based rate structure for all of our customers. And that is actually something that is really beneficial for us in implementing a lot of the urban water use objective efforts, in that our customers are already used to having a budget, and this is something we've been doing since 2011. So translating, 55,000 connections that have budgets to a water supplier scale budget is fairly doable. We're fully implemented in AMI as of not that long ago. So that's also really been helpful for us in trying to make sure that we're providing sources for our customers and detecting leaks. And then also just better understanding customer water use. Next slide. So this picture here of Charlie Day is sort of how it feels right now. Trying to keep track of everything going on, but a little bit about our group. So we're 6.5 FTE fully dedicated to water efficiency, and I say the half because so one member of our team is kind of split between a couple groups, but that's our crew. In addition to the 6.5 full-time, we also typically have one full-time temp and or a part-time intern, just kind of depending on what the needs are of our department and the season. We'll often try to grab an intern over the summer. We don't have a whole lot of universities super close to us, so a lot of times it's someone coming home for the summer. And then we did use some consultant help and some of the effort that I'll go over in a little bit, but for the most part, it's mostly been staff resources that have been spent on this. One thing that I will say that was helpful in hiring a consultant was a group contract that MODOC set up for working with a consultant to do some geospatial mapping of irrigation meters to get irrigated area measurements. And so we did jump on that contract for some of our irrigation meters. And that was really helpful to also see how someone else would do the process to see what else we could learn. So that's something to think about, is if you are going to be putting things out to contract, talk to your neighbors and see if a few of you can join up and maybe get a better deal for the price of the effort. We'll definitely be planning on, or we did this last December, and our plan is to continue doing alternative data submission to DWR and the Water Board, specifically on the landscape area measurements. Working on a water use efficiency plan right now. It's kind of hard to plan for, meeting objectives that are constantly moving, but that's what we're working on. And I will just say the AWE conservation tracking tool is really, really helpful if you're working on scenario planning. So would highly recommend checking that out. Next slide. So what I want to talk about is specifically some of the urban water subjective calculations, and then some of the BMPs. The approach we're taking is a geospatial approach using GIS and creating meter service areas for all of our accounts. Next slide. So what is a meter service area? And really what it is it's a geospatial representation of where water is used or allocated on a premise. And I really want to emphasize the term premise, because I think a lot of times we'll use the term parcel, and that may or may not be actually the right term to use. Our service area in South Orange County, we are a master plan community. So with homeowner associations and commercial associations, but even with being a master plan community, we have found that parcel boundaries don't necessarily align with water use boundaries for properties. So this kind of map here, kind of on a high level, is showing this is one really large commercial area, and you can see all options are here. So for example, the green areas, that's a potable irrigation meter. So that's drawn in like where all the planters and the grass areas and everything that irrigation meter is in charge of. And the purple is all of the recycled irrigation meter. And there's a separate polygon that represents for each irrigation meter. So, just in this neck of the woods, you can see there's a lot of recycled water, a lot of potable irrigation meters, but then there's even this yellow, and that represents the commercial mixed use meter. So even being a relatively new master plan community, we still have a mix of indoor and outdoor meters. And that's what the blue is representing, the indoor only meter. So it's all over the place, even in our community. Next slide. So I want to highlight one particular area, and the reason I wanted to highlight this here is because it really showcases basically my suggestion to not necessarily trust parcels. When we mapped out this area, so what you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, there's two blue polygons. The one on the right is a Chili's, and the one next to it is a more of a breakfast style restaurant. And so the two buildings are technically, I think they're connected, 1 meter for each suite. And then the green area in front of it, that's a polygon for its irrigation meter. But what you can see is the bottom part of their parcel, so the yellow lines represent the parcels. The bottom part of their parcel is served by a recycled irrigation meter that also serves this large kind of open space park kind of area. And so the idea really is that, one irrigation meter may span across multiple parcels. And the same is true at the top of this area where you have this yellow, it's a preschool actually right there. And so their meter for the preschool serves indoor and outdoor water use. And then the north part of their parcel is served by a recycled irrigation meter that irrigates quite a few parcels. So that's really helpful for us to really get very accurate measurements of the irrigated area for each account. Next slide. And so how we're getting the irrigation measurements is by using land use classification data or landscape classification data. This is the data set that we purchased from NV5. We did the data for the state. And so this is just more detailed data for all the commercial and non-parcel data. And so what you can kind of see here is that yellow outlined area was that preschool. And so each color you can see does correlates to different landscape types. So you can see on the west side of the property, there's a purple blob, and that's they have a little artificial turf area in the playground. The gray is, just sidewalk and parking lot and stuff like that. So that's how we're breaking it down based on these meter service areas instead of the parcels. Like one thing to keep in mind when you're talking about the commercial mums, and if this is an account you're going to have to do some more interaction with, if you're going purely based on parcel size, that might make a difference of whether or not you're chasing the right customer or not. For example, that preschool, their parcel size is for sure over 1/2 acre. And irrigated landscape on that parcel is almost 1/2 acre. But irrigated area for the commercial mum was only like 7,000 square feet. So it really matters how you define, what those thresholds are. And I'll be honest, the kind of revised language from the water board, I don't know if it's actually that clear anymore that it is still based on the parcel or not. So that might be something for folks to do some research on. Next slide. So moving past the landscape component and moving into some of the BMPs. So utilizing this exact same approach of creating a meter service area. So again, looking at the top, there's the preschool. What we were able to do is purchase a list of NAICS codes. So that's the North American Industrial Classification System. It's the replacement for the SIC codes. And so this was a pretty cheap list to buy. So this is all the businesses in our service area. That list already came geocoded. So basically with lat and long coordinates, place those in GIS. And what happens is you can see where that preschool is, it drops a little red pin. Well, it falls right within the meter service area for that preschool. So now we can export that data of the meter service area correlated to all the NAICS codes. And now we can say, oh, okay, that particular water account has one business located on the premise, and it's a preschool. So now I can really streamline that classification process And then you'll see on the west side, there's a blue building there. So that meter is only indoor. 2 NAICS codes got dropped there. So it is certainly possible that there are 2 businesses located on that commercial within that office. So that does present a challenge, and I'm sure that's something that a lot of you are finding when you're going through accounts is what happens when there's more than one business there. And you know, the ESPM categories have several categories that address that. But you might want to think about, you know, just because there's more than one business there, do you take the easy route of saying, oh, mixed, we're done? Or do you really look into it a little bit more to say, well, what really is all there? An example would be a Target with a Starbucks inside. There's 2 businesses there, right? But what's the principal activity? It's the Target. So do you code it as Target, or do you say, well, who's actually using the water? The reality is it might actually be at Starbucks. So there's a lot of different approaches you can go. I don't know if that there's a right or wrong approach. So it's something for you to think about. Right now, you know, something we're considering is when there are multiple business types is within the data set, you know, designating one as a primary and the others as either secondary or something else. And if there are 2 primaries, that's when we'll go ahead and say that's a multiple use site. You know, depending on what you're using as that metric. Is it gross square foot area, you know, that the company occupies, or is it water use? However you want to do it. Something else I think we really need to work on is terminology. So, you know, speaking of mixed use, depending on who you're talking to, mixed use really could mean a bunch of different things. You know, when we're talking about meter types, you know, we're really referring to the use class. How is water being used? So indoor and outdoor. Okay, that's mixed use. But when you talk to your urban planning or your regional planning folks, they're, you know, they're thinking more parcel types, and they're saying like, oh yeah, mixed use is when you have, you know, a retail space on the first floor and then you have apartments above. Oh, well, that's not what I was thinking about, you know. And then when you look at the Energy Star portfolio manager, they call mixed use, you know, more like when you have, for example, a light industrial park and there's an individual building with multiple suites, but 1 water meter. And, you know, you might have an industrial activity like a window fabrication in 1 suite, but some retail activity in the other suite, like maybe a property manager. And the other suite is actually a small sandwich shop that's really only open for lunch for all the folks working in that area. So mix just really means a lot of different things. I think that's something we need to be a little bit more clear about in our definitions. And as far as the disclosable buildings go, so we did the same approach as the NAICS. You can go onto the portfolio manager's website. You can download the list of folks that are currently reporting. Some of them may or may not actually be disclosable buildings, but they're currently reporting. That data is also geocoded, so I was able to drop them in, and they match with within the building footprint, so I can pair them up with the meter service area. So this particular one, for example, there are more than one business within the building, and that building was considered disclosable. It's multiple stories, so it hit that threshold, let's say, right? So I was able to identify them pretty easily through this route. But some things really to think about before jumping in and reporting data, you know, and I'm glad to see some progress with the water board is really making sure we can have contact with the customer and understanding, you know, what's their situation there, who's going to be reporting, because really a challenge is we're finding there's situations where, especially, you know, are they reporting correctly? I don't know. That's not our job to know that, but we're finding instances where the building operator or owner is reporting data for more of like a campus. So think of you know, a commercial campus where there's 3 or 4 buildings. They're reporting the water, and say those 3 or 4 buildings are all individually metered. They're reporting all the water use and power use in aggregate. So how am I supposed to pull that data? If, or do they want it reported in aggregate? Do they want it separately? So those are some kind of in the weeds things that, we can definitely support the customers in doing whatever they want to do. That's on them. But another reason why it's a lot better to see more that we're making data available instead of reporting on the customer's behalf and the updated regulations. Next slide. And this is the last slide really with information, but I think a challenge that we often hear is, I don't have the staff, I don't have the budget, I'm not going to get support. I, you know, Sometimes that might just be the case, right? And you're not going to get the support and you're not going to get the budget. But when you're making the pitch, when you're making the request, I would really suggest that you think beyond your own water use efficiency, one FTE or small group or whatever you have, and make the pitch to your management or council or board that what you're going to be working on, some of these efforts are, the benefits go far beyond just water use efficiency and just go far beyond regulatory reporting. Because I do agree, of course, we don't want to do work that's only for the sole purpose of reporting. At the same time, I don't want our district to get in trouble. So I'm still going to do it, right? So how do you make the pitch? What other things can you do? What other groups could this help? So obviously there's the water efficiency and conservation group, of course, right? But think about customer accounts, for example, the folks that take that first call to start service. When you can have better information on your accounts, where they serve, where they don't serve, that provides sometimes for us, it was a visual assistance for our customer account representatives to see buildings and accounts. So when someone calls and says, oh, I'm starting service at this address, they can more visually see, oh, are you sure? You're this small company and you want service for this whole building? Oh, I didn't realize it serves the whole building and so on. Really make sure that we're getting things right when the customer calls. This has also really helped with our field operations team having everything mapped out, because when there's a water leak on a customer's line and we're the first ones responding at 3 o'clock in the morning to locate the meter and shut it down, the person first showing up just sees water coming out of the hill, from the irrigation system. So if you can see on a map, kind of put your finger on the map of where that water's pouring out, it can tag back to the water meter so they know where to go shut off the meter to stop the leak, and then move forward with contacting the customer. It's also helped with cross connection as well, having better clarity of where recycled water is being served, where potable is being served, or two potable connections on a property, really just to make sure that we're being safe and reducing the chance of cross connection. For GIS, has actually really been helpful in some of this exercise, because we're providing data for other applications. And then finally, wastewater rates is something we're also looking into that specifically the commercial classification might help us out with. For example, doing the crosswalk over to those 18 plus, so the 22-ish or whatever categories we're using, that alone might help a little bit with understanding. But if you can go that next step to those subcategories, that really is going to better help your agency understand where your wastewater is going, what type of, if you charge different wastewater rates based on different, essentially, based on your fog program, what type of nasty stuff they're putting in the system. For example, our rates are different for a fast food restaurant compared to a regular sit-down restaurant. And the concept being that a sit-down restaurant has a lot more dishes that they're washing, so they have more of a demand on the system, whereas a fast food restaurant, very little washing. It's all paper plates going in the trash, but both of them have grease. So because of that, when I'm able to crosswalk down to the subcategories, I'm able to do both a cross check on our existing rates and make sure that we're charging everyone the right amount, but identify more of a consistent path forward on that aspect. So a few things to help you guys pitch, how to get the support that you need. And I think the next slide is just my email if you guys have any questions or want to chat. that's my contact info. And I'll put it in the chat too. And that's it.
Great. Thank you so much, Justin. I really appreciated the visual and detailed walkthrough of the complexity of commercial sites. I can echo everything Justin said. I've been in the field for 20 years and gotten in the weeds with Justin. He's shaking his head. And welcome to commercial. It's complex. I think that kind of goes back to our survey of why people are the most nervous about commercial. I find it fun. I find it exciting, but yeah, it can also be daunting. I do think some tips and tricks that Justin shared can be helpful for a lot. Using the new tools of GIS to kind of help visually figure out what's going on in the field will help you. I can echo, I did a couple sites in a strip mall, like you said, and then it's like, is it a grocery store? Is it at a restaurant? Or, well, it's both. You know, what do we classify this as? You're going to run into that a lot. And, or I would say disagreements and sources is also fun. He's shaking his head. Yes. So like you could have like one place said, oh, it's a dry cleaner, but then you look at Google Maps and it says, no, it's not, it's a restaurant. And then you look at like your APN, you know, and billing database and it says it's something else. Well, that's because it's changed over time. And so you're going to have your data, you know, get out of sync with each other. So that you're going to run into as well. And then sometimes you're just not sure what to label it. And we call those stumpers. You may have heard us in the past talking about that. You're going to have a handful of those. And you can talk to CalWEP. We've been trying to make a guide on classification, and that should hopefully help you, and or you can come back to the group and we can work through a lot of those stumpers together. And then Justin, a request, if you can put in the chat or email how you purchased your Nix code data, I think that might help a lot of people, and we're happy to share that back out.
Yeah,
With
real
that-
quick,
go
I'm
ahead.
gonna throw a couple companies in the chat, but
Okay.
we called 4 or 5 different companies that sell this type of data, and you know they all have different degrees of like accuracy or how often it gets updated and everything. So you know which data set you buy and you know will really be up to you. We purchased, I'll put it on here, we bought it from SafeGraph because we had recently used them, and so we felt like it was to be frank just easier to reuse that particular company. But there's a lot of other ones out there that have similar or the equal data quality, but I'll put a few in the chat that we contacted.
Great. Thank you, Justin, and thank you for your time. Okay, so we have reserved about 5 minutes. If we have any additional questions for any of the case studies, again, you're welcome to put them in the chat if you don't want to speak. But if you want to raise your hand, then we can take a few questions live from the group before we move on to Krista, and she will do non-functional turf after that. Any questions from the group? Thank you again to all of our wonderful case study presenters. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your insights and being, you know, kind of open, you know, with your current thinking, and appreciate you being part of the team as we all navigate this together. All right, so I see our first raised hand, Madeline from the city of Santa Barbara. Good morning, Madeline. What's your question?
Good morning. Sorry, I think my camera got unplugged, so I'm just a floating beach. So I was wondering about the reporting. This sort of goes to Vince's presentation, but just wondering if anyone, Vince or others, have ideas on this. So for the CII reporting, there is the section where we have to estimate the annual water savings for the BMPs. And I know in some of the work groups and other discussions, we've been asking State Board or DWR, like, are there established water savings for certain BMPs that we should all be using? Because some of the BMPs are outreach to commercial customers. How do you quantify those water savings? Some of it is partnering with green business programs, et cetera. So it's very easy to quantify, okay, we did an audit, they made some changes, here's before and after, here's the savings, or they made a retrofit. But a lot of the BMPs, at least in my mind, are harder to quantify what water savings. And this is part of the annual report. So just wondering if anyone else, you know, has thought about that, if we, you know, if there's any traction anywhere to get some established savings numbers that we're all using.
Great question, Madeline. I'll take a stab at it, and then I would love anyone else to join. And then Tia, you're here too. I think I saw you from CalWEP, and you can chime in. So I know I'm the chair of the CalWEP Research and Evaluation Committee. And one of the things we've been talking about is that exact challenge, Madeline, and how do we go about that? So what we're thinking about bringing back is they used to be called the PBMP reports, or potential best management practice reports. We've gone through a process of reviewing which ones are accurate still, and then identifying future ones that can try and help quantify individual activities you might do. The next report that we're looking at doing, we just voted, is on cooling towers in particular. So it's not all the things that you listed, but we are intending to put those, and CalWEP was willing to post those on a new website that they're going to launch to try and help with implementation. Because back when we used to use the BMP reports as kind of like a place to go to answer those questions, and at least we were consistent. It might not be perfect, but at least we were kind of all using the same numbers moving forward. And so I think the vision is that we'll try and go back to that and build that database and library over time, and then make that available to everybody to share. And I think we may even, as a group with AMI, GIS, and all these other tools, be able to keep feeding that and keep making those even more refined as we move forward. And then there always will be the squishy ones that are hard, like public outreach and whatnot, but we can do our best to maybe give a range or something like that, so that there's at least something accounted for in general, and then have a roll-up total that starts making sense for people that they can check. So I hope that's a partial answer, Tia. I don't know if you want to chime in on anything, or if anybody else wants to chime in, but also crowdsourcing. So if anybody is studying a particular thing, like SFPUC, I think, did something on food walks a while ago. If other people are doing particular items, if we could collect those all in one spot, because we used to have those posted when it was CWCC on the website, and then they were open for people to use. They were a combo of ones done by the CalWEP Research and Evaluation Committee, and also crowdsourced. If people had a good study, then they would be reviewed. Everyone agreed with the RNE that these were decent numbers, and then they would be posted and for use for others and available.
Michelle, if I would add, the one thing we're definitely looking for regional help on knowing and being able to quantify what the water savings is. But Madeline, like another thing to keep in mind, we can implement something, but that's not necessarily, and we can generate a water savings, but the virtue of the number is that it's going to be squishy, because businesses change. The economic output of a certain business over another one changes. So although we can do a water savings program just by the function of business output, water use goes up with it. So I'm not too worried about what it is we end up reporting down the line, just because businesses change, economies change, and water use changes with it. So we just have to be able to report what potential savings there are. And I appreciate the flexibility in the current regulation. I say flexibility loosely and kind of angrily, but there's the understanding of it's not going to be oh, you saved this many acre feet. Well, why am I not saying this on the CII portion?
Yeah, thanks, Vince. Yeah, and I think it is duly noted, like the average age of a restaurant is 7 years, right? So you might start with one, and then before you know it, it's another one, or something else entirely. Maybe it's no longer a restaurant. So I think, yeah, CI is very dynamic, but I think in the end of the day, Madeline may be taking your best shot at it, and then having some backup, of where and how you got your numbers is probably where a lot of us are going to land, I would say, overall. But anyone else have comments on that, or another question?
Well, Michelle, I just wanted to add briefly that, our interpretation is that the regulations are asking overall for suppliers to implement a suite of BMP measures that should add up to water savings, but it hasn't been our interpretation that means in our reporting, we need to be specifically documenting water savings by business classification. And we'll be rereading the revisions more closely, but I think that's how we are interpreting it, that, the legislation requested performance measures that collectively achieve water savings. And it's a bit murky, I think, that the regulations are, requiring a specific reporting back out on savings. And I would say that's probably up to suppliers to determine how they want to do that.
Thank you, Julie. And being on the CI work group, that was kind of the dialogue that I heard as well, is that it's at this point it was intended to be general because it is dynamic, like we heard Vince saying and Justin saying, and it's going to change. We all know that. And so, but just saying like, okay, we're going to save 10% or some sort of number and then backing that up, I think is kind of where a lot of people are going to land. Anyone? Thank you, Julie, for chiming in. Anyone else? Great question, Madeline. All right, we have time to maybe take one more question if anyone wants to chime in, and or we'll move on to non-functional turf. All right. Well, seeing none, maybe we did a great job as speakers, and that was a really great question that we all chimed in on. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to Krista. She's going to give us a flyover of our new regulations from the state, different set of regulations, but also regulations, legislation coming on down, and dive on into the details. Thank you for being here, Krista. Appreciate your flyover and walkthrough and what it really means and how we're going to get it done. So thank you for being here, and go for it.
All right, thanks. I was going to say that we're going to take a quick shift into a different topic, but really listening to everybody else talk about the case studies and what they were doing, non-functional turf came up a lot. So this isn't really that much of a shift, but it is a different regulation that we'll be talking about. Next slide. Sorry, next slide. So Metropolitan was the co-sponsor of the bill that we're going to be talking about today, AB 1572, and I wanted to sort of give context to that as to why we chose to go this route. As you're mostly all aware, or should be all aware, of course, there have been recent droughts. We had to put in an emergency conservation order during this last drought for parts of our service area where our state water project allocation was so low that we were very concerned we wouldn't be able to provide the normal amount of water to those areas. As part of that, also back in 2022, we signed an MOU as part of our efforts on the Colorado River and made an agreement to reduce our NFT in our service area by 30%. Many of you have seen our turf dashboard that we created and know that our current estimate of non-functional turf in our service area sits just under 900 million square feet. So if you do the math of 30% of that, that's quite a big number that we're trying to achieve here. So it requires a concentrated effort, not just on Metropolitan's position, but others as well, to do something in this arena. And AB 1572 really gave us that opportunity. So next slide, please. So what is AB 1572? For those of you who maybe heard of it in passing or haven't really heard of it, the basis of this regulation and this legislation is that it just bans irrigation of non-functional turf with potable water on CII properties. So we're focusing exclusively on CII. Residential is completely, single-family residential is completely removed from this. It's not part of it. You'll notice that it's just a regulation for banning irrigation. So there really isn't any discussion on replacing turf with something else or what happens when the grass dies. All of that is not really part of the way this is. Obviously, the hope and the idea behind it is that when you turn off irrigation and the grass dies, and nobody likes how that looks, and CII properties in particular, who are very interested in their image, will make the choice to replace and put in, those California-friendly landscapes that we all love and promote. But really, the crux of it is just turning off irrigation. That's the bottom line. The bill itself does exclude cemeteries and multifamily housing. Multifamily housing was an important piece for Metropolitan. We did not want to co-sponsor the bill unless we could get multifamily housing removed. Of course, we were paying particular attention to underserved communities and making sure that what is usually would be considered not function or would not normally be considered functional turf often can be functional turf. In these low income areas, they use, there's a lot of non-traditional green spaces that are used for recreation, and we wanted to make sure that those were preserved. However, an important thing to remember is that multifamily housing is not the same as HOAs. Schools, HOAs, and common interest developments are included as part of AB 1572. So there is a very clear distinction between multifamily housing and HOAs. And usually the next question I get is, well, are HOAs also multifamily housing? Are we only talking about single family HOAs? How does that work? If there is an HOA with common area, excuse me, with common area, that's an HOA. For multifamily housing, we're looking at like apartment buildings, condo buildings that are sort of standalone and would not fit that description. So HOAs can be both multifamily and single family residences on that property, but multifamily housing is without HOAs is different. There is also an exception that's made for tree health. So if you do, of course, have your trees and your turf grass on the same valve, you know, obviously we want people to keep their trees alive. That's a really important point for us. You can continue to water the grass around that tree so that the tree itself can get its irrigation that it needs. Question we often get is, you know, does that mean if you have a giant park, right, and there's a couple trees in that park, do you get to water the whole park? It really is valve isolated. So, and while enforcement and how this will all work has not fully been fleshed out yet, the idea would be that no, that's not really what we're talking about here. If you have a huge swath of non-functional turf, and sorry, I shouldn't have used the word park, but if you're have a huge swath of non-functional turf, you don't get to save that entire area because you have 2 trees on it, right? That's not really how that's going to go. During the development of AB 1572, there were a lot of questions on what is non-functional turf? How do we define that? And what we looked at was creating an actual definition of non-functional turf, and also looked at the opposite. Southern Nevada Water Authority, when they did their bill, they chose to define functional turf and then say NFT was everything else. So we actually decided to go that same route. So in the bill, you'll see a definition for functional turf, which is turf located in a recreational use area or community gathering space. Pretty basic understanding of if you're using it for recreation, if you're gathering, concerts, picnics, kids playing on it, all of those kinds of things, that's functional. We understand that to be functional. That clearly is not what we're talking about here. But other turf spaces where that's not happening, people are, you know, we hear all the time, people are only standing on it to mow it. People are not really gathering to have a picnic in front of like a Walmart or something like that. Those are generally considered to be non-functional. Next slide, please. So I wanted to look at just some examples of non-functional turf, because I think what's really important and can be difficult in this bill as we move forward with implementation is understanding what's black and white and where are the gray areas, right? So what's really obviously non-functional turf and what might take some nuance and some discussion. So let's look at public properties first. So what you have here are 3 photos of public properties. We have a welcome corner for the city of Simi Valley. We have a parkway strip on the side of a road, and then we have a grass area outside of a fire department. And so each of these are public property. They would fall within AB 1572. It'd be pretty easy to say very black and white. The parkway would be non-functional turf. Pretty easy also to say that a welcome corner that you're just driving by as you drive into the city, more than likely non-functional turf. You don't really see people walking over to this little strip of grass to do something on it. And then maybe you have the fire department, and that's possibly a little bit more. Maybe they do training there. Maybe they have staff picnics outside or some version of that. So it's a little bit more of a gray area. But again, there's a good chance that in that fire department photo, not all of that turf that would be considered functional or necessary, maybe just a portion of it as well. So something that will have to be considered when we get through implementation. Next slide. School properties. There was a lot of discussion about, is all grass on schools functional? And while we can agree that a good majority of it is, it's not all functional, right? There are definitely small patches of grass that are around in parking lots, around buildings, that are not necessarily needed to be, are not used as functional on school property. So these are good examples here. You see this little triangle of turf in a parking lot. Yes, there is a giant tree in it. So now there's that tree health piece that comes into it. But at the same time, that doesn't need to be grass. and it doesn't need to be irrigated. You see here on the lower photo, again, these very small sections of grass right behind the benches. That's not where kids are going to be doing recess. They're not going to have lunch there. Do they walk across it? Probably to get from class to class or to go, home or get to school in the morning? Probably. Does it need to be turf grass for them to do that? No. So again, looking at some of those gray areas. Next slide, please. Couple more on the school property. Again, you can see that bottom photo, just those really small strips of grass. Not saying nobody's walking across it, but it doesn't need to be turf grass. And that's just them walking across it to get to the gate does not necessarily make it functional. Something that's much more in a gray area would be that aerial imagery that you see on top. And you have those sort of longer strips of grass on either side of the building. Those could certainly be, gathering areas in an emergency, fire drills, things of that nature. Certainly people are probably walking across it in order to go from one building to another. But again, does it have to be grass for you to do that? So does that really make it functional? These are decisions that will have to be made. Next slide. And then HOA property. So this is the one where there is a large amount of grass on the HOA properties that would be considered functional, right? There are places where people walk their dogs and children play, and they need that space. However, usually you can find small patches of grass in parking lots next to the actual homes. You can see that top right one with the small little corner of grass next to the garage. That's not functional grass. That would definitely be something that would fall under AB 1572 and would not be allowed to be irrigated. Same thing with the larger picture you're seeing of the slope area. Certainly someone could make the case for functional because it is a larger area, but it's also a slope. So the likelihood that there are children playing on it or something of that nature is much less likely. Next slide. No, we're running out of time. I'm trying to go fast. CII property, I like to say, is probably one of the most cut and dry functional versus non-functional, simply because there are very few places where people will recreate outside of a commercial business. Right, so you have outside of warehouse property, and then the top photo being outside of a shopping plaza. We have all seen those strips of grass on the front of the shopping plazas when we're driving down the street. All of that non-functional falls under AB 1572 and will need to not be irrigated. Next slide. So how is 1572 actually going to work? Well, to be perfectly honest, we don't have all of the details yet. State Water Resource Control Board is responsible for setting the actual regulation itself and understanding the same way that they're doing with the framework. However, because they are very heavily focused on the framework right now, they have not put their attention to 1572 yet. So we don't have those details. There are, however, specific dates and information in the bill, and that's what I'll go over now. So the timeline for the compliance is a phased implementation. It starts in January of 2027 with all non-DAC public properties. So the idea being that the public agencies need to go first, right? They're going to set the example. They're going to be the ones to turn off their irrigation first and make these changes. But it's only for non-DAC areas. So if you have public property in a DAC area, a DAC census tract, you do not need to implement in 2027. In January of 2028, it moves to all CII properties. Right? So those would be our commercial and industrial properties, the sort of better black and white cut and dry. In January 2029, then it moves to HOA and similar common areas. So they are after the commercial businesses, but they are before the final category, which is in January of 2031, DAC public property, or when funding is available. So the idea being that a public property in a DAC area, DAC census tract, does not have to comply with this unless there is funding available for them to actually do turf replacement. Do not want AB 1572 to be responsible for the degreening of these areas and creating the decision, and basically creating a bigger problem in these areas where you have less green space, you have dead grass. Certainly not going to be responsible for that. So funding does need to be made available before they have to comply. Note, most importantly in this, is that it only applies to public property. That means that commercial businesses and HOAs, everything else in DAC areas have to comply with their January 2028 and January 2029 timeline, right? They don't get that same path that the public agencies get. And that's an important point that I want everyone to absorb. There are related items that you as a water agency will have to follow. In January of 2027, you will have to revise your ordinances and regulations to include language on this ban and communicate it to customers. Technically, in the language, that's the only thing that the water agency has to do. You have the ability to enforce. It says you may enforce, but it doesn't say that you have to. What I would like to point out is that if you put this language in your ordinance or regulations as required, you now have something on your books that you really have to enforce unless you want to open yourself up to lawsuits from third parties for not enforcing part of your ordinance or your regulation. So you can't have something on your books that you're asking your customers to do and then not checking that they're doing it and not making sure that that's happening. So it's sort of a roundabout way of requiring suppliers to enforce without actually saying it in the bill. Starting in June of 2030, that is when CII properties over 5,000 square feet will have to self-certify their compliance. So the idea is that property owners will actually self-certify to the state board and to likely the water agencies that they have how much of their property is functional versus non-functional and that they have turned off their irrigation. Again, the question of who's going to enforce that, who's going to make sure they do it, who's going to tell them that they have to do it, all questions that the state board still needs to answer. They will be the ones creating the form, that we know, but all the details beyond that, we don't have yet. And then the same thing is true for 2031 for the HOA properties. And I believe that's my last slide. Yes. So really short, quick look at AB 1572. I know we're basically right at the end, but happy to take any questions.
All right. Well, yeehaw, we did it. All right. Great job. Thank you to all of the 7 presenters that we've had today. Really appreciate your time. We are going to open it up for any last comments. Elizabeth, do you have anything to say, or if people have questions on anything you've seen so far? It could be Krista, it could be any of the 4 panelists. It can be on the regulations Elizabeth gave. We have a few minutes and we're willing to stay to see that you get them addressed. So anyone like to raise their hand on any topic? And we can try and address them as a group before we wrap up. All right, I see one. Ursula, you want to unmute?
Yes, thank you. I posted in the chat. This was for Krista. Which tool are you using to define the DAC? Is it the EnviroScreen 4.0?
So the state board will have to define the DAC as part of that, and we expect that it will match pretty much all other legislation and regulations that they have in place. Right now, EnviroScreen is the default, but they do allow like CGES and a couple other ones as well. So we expect it to be the same.
Okay, thank you.
Great question and great answer. Thank you, Krista. Anyone else? I see a lot of comments in the chat for thank you for hosting. So yes, thank you for San Diego for hosting us all. Any last comments, Elizabeth or Joni, before we, or Debbie, sorry, before we wrap up?
Just want to say again, thank you for participating. If you're reviewing the water use efficiency regulations and you have comments or concerns, please feel free to reach out to me and we'll see what we can do to add those into the comment letters that are being developed right now. So thank you again for coming, and hope to hear from you.
And a reminder, the state board meeting is tomorrow. The agenda is posted. I think it's agenda item 6. It doesn't have a time. They just kind of roll through them. So, but it does is tomorrow. It's posted. We can maybe send out a follow-up in this email with the slides and material and a link to where that is. Other than that, happy reading for those of you that haven't read it yet. Hopefully this is insightful and helpful for you. I hope you have a great rest of your day and stay tuned. I think we are going to have some additional workshops. So hope you join us and hope you take that survey. One last plug for the survey. And other than that, thank you again for your participation. Hope you have a great day.
Thank you.